Meep.
Euphoria has had an interesting fall from grace in the last 7 years. While Season 1 was initially met with near universal praise, by the time a divisive Season 2 rolled out, it felt like the general vibe surrounding the show couldn't possibly get any worse, and then Season 3 was announced. In the 4-year gap between Seasons 2 and 3, we've watched as some of the main cast and collaborators of the show have moved on to other successful and more creatively interesting endeavors, while others have tragically passed away or left over creative differences, and a select few have even fallen into some pretty heinous controversy. By the time I reviewed Euphoria in 2023, series creator Sam Levinson had found himself in hot water. The Idol had just released, which was supposed to be this big moment for him.
I think we're about to have the biggest show of the summer.
But it turned out to be a gigantic piece of shit flop that is mostly only remembered for reportedly fostering an incredibly toxic working environment, not unlike Levinson was accused of doing with Euphoria Season 2. And in that same year, Levinson was also accused of straight up stealing Euphoria's entire art style from photographer Petra Collins, and there's probably 500 other controversies on top of that I'm going to ignore for the sake of getting to the point, which is that I wasn't so much excited for Season 3 of Euphoria as I was anxious. Given how much I enjoyed the first 2 seasons, it felt weird going into what is supposed to be the show's grand finale with all the looming dread of attending a funeral. Plus, because of all the drama surrounding the production, people have been ready to tear this season apart well before the first episode even released, and that's never a great landscape to be publishing a review in. No matter what I say, there will be a lot of angry people, so I'm just gonna stop dancing around it and say that having watched Season 3 in its entirety, I thought that it was okay. It was fine. If there's one thing the entertainment industry and the internet both hate, it's indifference, because it's really bad at keeping eyeballs permanently glued to screens, and it can definitely feel like a cop-out when talking about a show like Euphoria, that is so precisely crafted to incite controversy that it's basically rage baiting its own audience at this point.
You know what's funny? The angrier these idiots get, the more money you make. Yeah.
I say that to say, don't get it twisted. This is easily the worst season of the entire show, no doubt in my mind about that. But still, I did find it sporadically interesting, and it surprisingly left me with a lot to talk about, which I will now do, if you will allow me. I think the most prominent question in my mind while watching this season was, what exactly is Euphoria at this point? And to some degree, I think the show itself is asking that same question. For numerous reasons, yet another season of drug-fueled high school drama wasn't gonna fly this time around. A reinvention was necessary, but that proved to be an incredibly difficult challenge, one that, to the creative team's credit, I think they tried to meet. In fact, it's been really interesting to see critical consensus of the show take such a nosedive when this season seems like a direct response to the show's most vocal critics. People said the show was style over substance, and while Season 3 is certainly stylish, featuring lavish production design and cinematography, it is decidedly more subdued. And this restraint even makes its way to the pacing of the show. What once was criticized for being stuffed to the brim with plot, so frantically paced and scattershot, is now a comparatively slow burn. This season really takes its time, giving the audience a lot of breathing room. And of course, the most loud critiques of the show come down to its romanticization of taboo subjects like drug abuse, as well as its gratuitously sexual nature, especially considering the first 2 seasons were set in high school. To the first point about feeling romanticized, Season 3, in my opinion, veers wildly in the opposite direction, feeling deliberately repulsive to the point of coming across mean-spirited at times. And to the second point about gratuity, the show is still being heavily criticized for this. The level of sexualization hasn't changed much at all, but at the very least, Season 3 does take place 5 years after the last one, so all the characters are now adults. kind of feels like the bare minimum, given that that was more of a practical decision than a creative one, but still, it's something. The problem, of course, is that this leads to a bit of a Ship of Theseus situation. So much about the show has changed that it hardly feels like the same show anymore, and by contrast, some, and I repeat, some of the creative choices those first 2 seasons made start to feel vindicated. The frenetic pace, flashy camera moves, and volatile emotions the show was exploring made it energetic and vibrant. The rapidly dichotomous characters and romanticized lens through which the tragic story was told made it feel warm and human. Everything about Euphoria Season 3, by comparison, feels more flat and cold. The characters lack dimension, the story takes a long time to gain any momentum, and in general, I hate to be this frank, but it can be kind of boring. Because in all this change, the show forgot that it's really the characters that gave the show life. In place of emotional volatility, this season should have introduced more complexity to its characters, but instead, the only way it seems to know how to pull drama out of them is by making them all one-dimensional, aimless dumbasses. Now for Rue, being in a directionless rut post-high school and giving her life to the whims of those she works for or to God, it makes sense for her character, and I'd be willing to buy into it if every other character weren't essentially in the same position, living life at someone else's behest, rehashing old drama, and in general just making one idiotic decision after the next. While that may be purposeful in so much as that's what a lot of your early 20s can feel like, it's never all too compelling, mainly because the emotional stakes are never present. Rue is cut off from pretty much anyone she had any real connection to, apart from Jules, who basically serves as Rue's Rapunzel trapped in the tower for her to maybe save and share true love with.
She's like a modern day Rapunzel. She is trapped up in the tower.
There's sort of a fairy tale quality to it. A tower and a castle that she's locked in.
Ali, outside of the final 2 episodes, is barely here. Rue's mom, Leslie, is a cameo at best, and the new relationships Rue finds herself in are either fleeting or completely one-sided and transactional. Again, I get that it's kind of the point, it's just not all that gripping. Then you have Cassie and Nate, which, I'm gonna be blunt, I just don't give a shit about either of them. They're both complete idiots who constantly shoot themselves in the foot and whose struggles couldn't be any less relatable at this point. Their stories admittedly do play well for comedy. I got a lot of genuine, intentional laughs from the situations they found themselves in, so if that was the goal, good job, I guess. But if I was meant to feel any real sense of tension or empathy, pretty much everything here fell flat. There's nothing really engrossing about Nate getting beat up every other scene or watching as he has a Sammy Classic Sonic fan style fit of rage over some flowers.
That is it! This is the final straw! You guys are the ones that ruined Sonic for everyone! Can't you see that? You guys have officially made me lose my marbles!
And there was really only one moment where the wall that is Cassie's extremely vapid life and emotions actually cracked enough to let some humanity shine through. It was a seriously intense scene that I loved a lot, and I thought it was maybe going to be some sort of a tipping point for her, but no, that one moment in isolation is all we get. Then you have Lexi and Maddie, who, much like Jules, both serve as plot devices more than individual characters. While both their stories do lightly explore the reality of being an ambitious artist at the bottom rung of the Hollywood ladder, they're mainly just here to keep the story moving forward, mostly in service of Rue and Cassie's arcs. So all in all, apart from a few bright spots in Rue's personal exploration of faith and identity, there's just not much to go off of here on an emotional level. The most compelling character in this season is its newest addition, Alamo. Not only is he a genuinely intimidating villain, but his cold open is easily the most riveting story this season tells. And a lot of that, as admitted by Sam Levinson, is a result of pulling from the life story of Iceberg Slim. Even so, though, I think it's well told, and it really reminded me why I loved this show in the first place. I guess in hindsight, Euphoria has always been strongest at establishing its characters. The cold opens always hit with a gut punch and add so much emotional richness to the flawed but deeply human stories the show explores using these characters. But now it is so painfully obvious that all the good ideas this creative team had for these characters were completely exhausted by the end of season 2. Because here, the characters are more tools being used to tell a different, broader story about America. A self-reflexive Western that explores the strange dissonance between American values and American reality, showing how the lives we glamorize are often, in actuality, extremely depraved, exploring how a country that prizes itself on freedom often puts people in circumstances where they have very little agency in their own lives. And of course, the irony of a supposedly devout Christian nation being built on industries that rely on what are often called the deadliest of sins, which ties directly into this season's Christianity-heavy theming. Is it possible to find salvation in a horrible, decaying world? How does spirituality help people find purpose in their suffering? I know that sounds heady and maybe even a bit pretentious, but the show is pretty blunt about all this stuff.
I just want good old-fashioned American problems.
You know, the thing about fentanyl is, it's not even happening in other countries. Only in America.
I want the American dream.
They're shutting the border down.
Put hardworking Americans like us out of business.
America. My dream.
So blunt, in fact, that it starts to feel like these are the only things the show is interested in exploring, or, well, not exploring so much as relishing in. And I will say that though I don't have much personal attachment to the ideals of America or Christianity, the show does explore these things in a way that, in key moments, feels tasteful and thought-provoking. It's kind of impossible to ignore how America's identity crisis affects all of us living in it, and it feels disingenuous to say that we're not all deeply flawed people looking for absolution wherever we think we can find it. The problem isn't so much that the show doesn't have a lot of interesting or new things to say about these themes. Like, I'm not looking for Euphoria to give me definitive answers or moral guidance on God, the meaning of life, or the state of America. No, again, it's more so that there's nothing to emotionally ground me in those themes on a character level. As it turns out, the emptiness of American life churns out a pretty empty story. All theme, no humanity. Which could be interesting or contemplative in its own right, and occasionally here it is. It's just plainly the wrong fit for a show like Euphoria, which once thrived on maximalist sentimentality. The wrong fit kind of encapsulates a lot of this season's creative choices, if I'm honest. A lot of the individual elements aren't terrible, but they never coalesce into something that resembles the show's title. Which begs the question, why then am I not calling this an outright bad season of television? Why am I still willing to defend it enough to say that it's fine? Well, first and foremost, I actually really liked the conclusion to Rue's character arc here. While it didn't hit with the full weight it probably should have, given that Rue, for me, has always been the beating heart of this show, I do think her fate is both fitting and the most emotionally sincere piece of writing in this entire season. It's very clear this particular ending was written from a raw and vulnerable place, the kind of writing we really could have used more of here. While I don't want to spoil anything or get too into specifics, it harkened back to moments in my life in a way I found truly resonant. The inevitability of it all and the extremely conflicting combination of sorrow and relief. It's not something I can say I've seen pulled off well in many stories like this, so I do give this season its flowers for that, if nothing else. Secondly, I still think there's a lot to be said for how slick the production is. I know for many it's simply window dressing, but I've said it before, and I'll say it again, style itself can be substantive, and I don't think it should be understated just how incredible Euphoria still is on a technical level. It's so nice to see one of these bloated, expensive productions actually look the part. The staggering amount of prowess behind the camera, especially in terms of movement and composition, is as strong here as ever, maybe even more refined than previous seasons. Third thing I want to say is that I do think there's some merit to the idea that many of the criticisms lobbed at this season, including from myself, are more about what surrounds the show or what the show isn't, rather than what it is. On its own merit, this season is a serviceable neo-Western crime thriller that manages to pack in some genuinely tense action sequences and brings a lot of Western tropes into a modern setting in a way that feels either natural or amusing, all while painting a fairly stark picture of the modern underbelly of LA, and again, touching upon many of the ideas and anxieties floating around the collective unconscious of modern America. It never reaches the heights of its painfully obvious influences, but it gets the job done and occasionally does it pretty damn well. And lastly, while this is admittedly a backhanded compliment, I do think it's commendable that a season of television with such turbulence behind the scenes is as coherent and watchable as it is. This is certainly not the absolute disaster I think myself and many others expected it, or in some cases, low-key wanted it to be. But when the highest praise you have for something's general quality is it's not as big of a train wreck as it arguably should have been, obviously that still doesn't bode well for the season overall. It's not great, it's not even really good, it's just okay. It's passable enough for a single viewing, it has a few standout moments, and I can't say it left me with nothing to chew on, but despite its attempts to bring it all home with a melodramatic and epic conclusion, I will probably be largely forgetting this story within the span of a couple months. And for a show that so cloyingly tries to be anything but boring, that weirdly feels more damning than calling it outright awful. I mean, at least it's over now, and I'll always have season 1 and the special episodes, but I just can't help but feel a bit sad that the show that used to dig so much emotion out of me ultimately left me feeling hollow.